This is a very interesting picture here. This is a Happy New Year. Nicola Sturgeon's mouth is covered. We've got two Tories, and we've got Willie Rennie front and centre. This is the BBC's New Year message to us, and I mean it's quite a subtle one, but you look at that and you think, well, somebody wasn't thinking very carefully about how that looked.
Or maybe they were.
or maybe they were. Well, that's the other thing. And then this headline, which is, I think, an absolute masterful piece of misdirection.
Oh, yeah.
Scotland could have helped hundreds avoid HIV. This refers to the English NHS, not sorry, the DHS, the DHSS not accepting help from Scotland, who had ways of addressing this, and but the blame there seems to, I mean, if you read that, that looks like Scotland didn't do enough when it was actually England didn't ask for enough help. I mean, that we've seen for a long time now, I mean, especially in 2013, 2014, the BBC doing a lot of things that a lot of us felt were not exactly fair. Is there anything we can do now, I mean, even within something like the referendums bill, is there anything we can do about the manipulation that we get from the sort of the good media?
Oh, it's such a difficult one. I mean, I go between real anger when I saw the New Year message with poor old Nicola getting gagged like that, and then the one about the blood supplies. I get really angry, and I feel, you know, that it's a deliberate thing that they're doing. And then I calm down and I think, is it just because it is so establishment-centric that it doesn't even enter their heads that it's an issue? You know, are the SNP, you know, as the government in Scotland and the party with overwhelming support in Scotland, is it that they still think of the SNP as some kind of outside pressure group or something, and that it's really not that deliberate? So I go between the two, but I think we have to keep calling it out. I think we're at the stage now where the strength of the SNP is being denied by what's supposed to be the national public broadcaster. So we have to keep calling it out. I know that Keith Brown has been doing a lot of that work on behalf of my own party. But I think it's time for the others to get on board as well. I mean, we're hearing Labour talking about democracy. We're hearing the Tories talk about democracy. How about the Scottish Tories and Scottish Labour looking at true democracy in Scotland, not just relative to their own parties and what suits their political agenda, but looking at it and saying, do you know what, this isn't right.
And our first story today is to talk about the All Under One Banner March in Glasgow yesterday. Something like 80,000 people marched through Glasgow in the pouring rain. Unfortunately, because of the weather, the rally had to be cancelled. There was fear of high winds basically taking down the stage, and of the rain turning Glasgow green into Glasgow brown. So we had to turn that into a press conference. I say we, All Under One Banner, turned that into a press conference held at West. Broadcasting Scotland had full live coverage of that, a number of excellent speakers. But, so first of all then, were you both on the march?
No, I have to confess, I had prior engagements. That's the life of an MP, or my life now, where things are put in my diary months in advance.
Of course.
And I just couldn't get out of what I was meeting with long-standing friends yesterday.
Okay.
And, you know, if I want to keep my long-standing friends when I'm no longer an MP, I have to meet up with them occasionally.
Yeah,
so.
we were just talking about this, about how important that is for you. And I don't think anyone's questioning your commitment to the, independence cause as a result. Gerry, you were on the march, I
was.
And you wrote about this as well.
I was, and I spoke and interviewed the organisers beforehand, and I've been on other All Under One Banner marches to some of the smaller towns and places of Scotland, which, I mean, I think is something that really just needs acknowledgement. It's a fantastic decision. Yes. Scotland is beyond the central belt, obviously, and beyond the cities. and presence, visibility, saying something about the diversity of Scotland is really, really impressive. I think that, you know, allowing for the fact that this organisation has been set up by a group of people themselves, the learning curves and pains they've gone through, which anybody does, creating something successfully from scratch. There's something fantastic here, and it's actually beyond independence. It's about kind of like the independence of independence in a way, and we haven't had enough of that in Scotland across the board. So I think there's something unique and sort of historic here that needs celebrating and acknowledging.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a very good relationship with several people all under one banner here at Broadcasting Scotland. We've had a couple of people in as guests, and Andrew Wilson especially is just a wonderful guest to have in. But as you say, it is all volunteers, and they're. We had, at the press conference, I was stunned. We had Nikkei from Japan, NHK from Hong Kong, TRT from Turkey, France 24, the BBC, STV, S4C, and a wee independent Welsh broadcaster, a wee bit like Broadcasting Scotland, all there as well. I mean, this is really a global thing that all under one banner have achieved.
And I think what they've achieved in the fact that so many people repeatedly turn out for marches, and that it is in the smaller towns, as you have said, Gerry, is testament to the hard work they have put into that. And I think as well, it's only going to get bigger. This year, as we're all looking forward to another referendum, as
our first story today is about some people who are not feeling quite so well. This is in China, where the death toll from the coronavirus epidemic has now reached 811, which passes the number killed by the SARS epidemic in 2002-2003. This comes as millions of people across China are due to go back to work tomorrow following an extended New Year break. There are still some companies not going back. There are still schools going to be closed all over the country, and a lot of people are still being encouraged to work from home. So, Janette, this coronavirus, this has been an ongoing story for a wee while, and one of the questions I've been asking everybody when we've talked about this is, do you get the feeling that this is something where China has just acted quickly, tried to close down the epidemic as quickly as possible? Or do you get the feeling that maybe there's something bigger going on that we're not hearing about?
I don't know. I was incredibly impressed by the speed with which they built that hospital. Kind of like a whole hospital in kind of, you know, an afternoon kind of. I think, to be honest with you, from what I know about viruses, which is remarkably little, that it's once a virus starts to spread, then there's not necessarily, it's not something that you have complete human agency over, that you can just go, okay, we'll stop that. I think they do seem to have done what they can. I think in the case of like this, the Dr. Li Wenliang, who I understand has now died himself of the disease, I'm not quite sure how, you know, what one understands a lot about China is that they are very into the kind of like a positive promotion of their image, of a positive image of themselves. And so the idea that this disease could be happening there, they might well have tried to shut that down. They've also, you know, where SARS came out of China. So many of these things historically have come that way from the East. But it is a country with a huge, an inconceivably huge population compared to most other countries that we might visit. So how they might contain that, it seemed, I don't know, I mean, I'm not a virologist, so I can't say. I think this seems now to be fairly kind of active measures to prevent it. But a virus is like nature, it kind of, you know, it will do what it does, and some transmit very readily, some don't. This one seems to be a bit more contagious than they thought it was. I think I was reading yesterday some cases in France now of people who have not been to China, and it's so. What can I say about kind of what is a government which is relatively concealed from public eye? You know, it's about what their discussions might be. I suspect they may well have tried to kind of shut down the transmission of too much information. But we also know that if you're dealing with a public health issue, you have to put out information. And they're concerned about public public panic. If it happens during a massive holiday but nobody's at work, you might hope that kind of within a week or two it might subside. So it would be okay, do you know? It's
Yeah, I mean, certainly the fact that it happened right at the time of the new year has been a particular problem because so many people are travelling.
Yeah.
That has been a problem, and obviously as well, it seems that people are able to infect others before they start showing symptoms themselves, which obviously poses a huge problem. We have heard that the Pentagon has revealed a deal with Britain to replace Trident. This said earlier this month, Pentagon officials confirmed that the proposed W-93 sea-launched warhead would share technology with the UK's next nuclear weapons, which implies that a decision has already been made about how the replacement for Trident is going to move ahead. The UK has not publicly agreed anything. The Ministry of Defence annual update to Parliament just before Christmas just said, work also continues to develop the evidence to support a government decision when replacing the warhead. But last week, Admiral Charles Richard, who's commander of the US Strategic Command, said this effort will also support a parallel replacement warhead programme in the UK, whose nuclear deterrent plays an absolutely vital role in NATO's overall defence posture. So this is something that I'm sure you'll be discussing over the coming days. What's your feeling about this coming out first of all, coming out via America, and secondly, the fact that a decision has been made without Parliament being involved in it?
Well, okay, there's a number of strands to this. There are laws in place which says Parliament can make decisions about war, which they don't have to come back to the actual Parliament to. So government can make decisions, they don't have to come back to Parliament to discuss. The Prime Minister has the royal prerogative, and he can literally declare war if that's what he wants to do. He can also end wars if that's what he wants to do. So there's issues in there which they will always again say, well, it's a matter of sort of military intelligence. You know, we can't discuss everything here in an open forum because that then leaks out. My basic problem with this is that we are looking to renew and expand the Trident ballistic missile system, which we know is pretty much redundant for a number of reasons. Warfare's moved on. The next warfare, you know, someone once said, how would the Third World War be fought? And they said, I don't know, but the fourth will be with sticks and stones. Well, I think the third one's going to be fought as a cyber war. It's not going to be, thankfully to some extent, a case of hundreds of thousands of people being slaughtered, as we've done previously. If they can get into your networks, and they can take your power away from you, they can interrupt your banking, they can interrupt the process, the distribution of food, then you've got problems on your own streets. And that's the areas we should be looking at. If we're going to spend serious money to counteract people we believe are going to a threat to this country, that's where we should be looking. Submarines can now be tracked. We know they can be tracked, so why do you want to carry a ballistic missile carrying a nuclear warhead on a submarine these days? Now, I'm an MP for Inverclyde. I've grown up with what was then Polaris and now Trident, literally across the water from where I live. I see these submarines coming and going all day. They're out there doing their manoeuvres, so they're a very real thing to me, which I grew up accepting. We had American servicemen in and around the town when I was a kid growing up. That was a very exciting thing at the time. It was quite glamorous. It was the days of Elvis Presley and rock and roll. We had these Americans, sailors out there who had chewing gum and all that. It was great. And then one day you realise what's actually happening here. That when you see the thing that says, if a nuclear war should break out, you're the first target. And Inverclyde, we're dust. It's as simple as that. But beyond that, you poison the watershed. The life as we know on this planet would not exist. So why? Who would want to progress this and say, this is a good way of spending money now? And it's all about the munitions factories. It's all about the money. We go back to projects we talked about earlier on, where a lot of people make a lot of money from it, and nothing actually happens. This is what's happening here. We've got to renew what we've already got, so we spend billions, £200 billion on doing that, with the idea that we'll never ever use it, but it's still going to make a lot of people very, very rich in the process.
And this is a story about a Treasury advisor, Dr. Tim Lunig, who is understood to have said that the food sector is not critically important to the British economy, and that agriculture and fisheries certainly isn't. So these some leaked emails to the new Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. He's reported to have said that Britain could follow the example of Singapore, which is rich without having its own agricultural sector. Obviously, Singapore is a small island doesn't have the space to have the kind of agricultural sector that we do. But this is obviously going to be quite a shock to the fishermen and the farmers who were sold Brexit as a way to free themselves from EU interference, to be able to, for fishermen particularly, to increase their catch, for farmers not to be bound by some of the bits of the common agricultural policy that they're not so fond of. James, with your political hat on, is this the kind of thing that that advisors will tell politicians a lot, that you can just abandon an industry?
It appears to me to be a wee bit of the Marie Antoinette thing, where it's food isn't really that important, let them eat cake, you know, that they'll get by, it'll be all right for us, doesn't matter for them. For Scotland, it's vitally important. I mean, farming and fishing are two huge industries in Scotland, and this is very much in line with it doesn't matter, and what they mean is it doesn't matter here, but it does matter up there, and they don't even recognise that. And it's a complete disregard that anything outside of that southeast of England is being treated with the Westminster government. So it's a ridiculous thing to say. You know, briefings have from here to there, but I've never heard of a Scottish government briefing that would say, but this industry, which only affects part of Scotland, isn't important, because we'd recognise it's important to that part of Scotland, even if it didn't play a huge role in the economy of the rest of the country. This is a huge part of the economy of Scotland. Scottish food and fishing is, you know, world renowned, and they just don't seem to take it into account at all. I think it doesn't surprise me. We've been saying all the time that as soon as that vote's through, they'll sell you out. And, you know, unfortunately, the farmers and fishermen are finding out now that that's exactly the case.
What's your experience as a woman in politics, and what's your what differences do you think we can make that would help to make it easier for women to get into politics?
So, my personal experience in the process of becoming a politician was largely positive. I'm from a political party that has a gender balance mechanism. My lovely branch said that they would have chosen me anyway, which is a nice thing. But I think things like gender balance mechanisms are important until we get to the point where we are electing people because of the contribution they can make and not based on their gender, which we still are. They are necessary. Largely positive, I have to say. Positive campaign. Local people who were very supportive generally. My experience since I've been in politics is a very different thing. Comments like, the council is now being run by wee girls cutting about in flowery dresses. Now it is being run by women walking about in flowery dresses, but I am not a wee girl. I am a 34-year-old woman with expertise and the capacity to do my job. And perhaps if we'd had more people with expertise and the capacity to do the job in the past, we wouldn't be in the state we're in.
But we never asked the question of family responsibilities about men representing far-flung constituencies. You know, both the Orkney and Shetland represented by men. Yeah. We don't ask how their families are coping. Yeah. But we do think, you know, well, what that woman, how's she going to manage with her family and her job? Yeah. Yeah. What's the? I mean, you know, we're not going to solve entrenched misogyny in the 7 or 8 minutes we've got left, but what steps do you think we could start to take to change this, so that we have a system where, firstly, women find it easier to enter politics and stay in politics, and secondly, to where we start asking the same questions of men that we ask of women?
Well, I agree with Lisa. Changing the discourse in public life is really important. Making it a space that is safe for women to feel that they can inhabit is absolutely vital. And the present context of abuse that women receive, what they have to put up with in the public domain if they are working in the public domain, is extremely difficult. To be constantly on the end of that and to be constantly building your courage again after you're knocked down is no small thing. It's really important to have a strong, respectful debate and discourse about everything that is difficult to talk about. And change is always difficult to talk about. Asking a group of people who have enjoyed the benefits of power to cede those benefits in the name of the common good will produce some defensiveness, some backlash, and also some real torrents of abuse, as Lisa has said.
But I just wanted to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned, Allyson, and I think what you were saying there was that we have taken a reactive. So this is pretty much a number 10 led approach, and
Yes.
they have allowed events to overtake. They have allowed basically a pandemic, a virus, which is spreading exponentially, to overtake administrative and executive decisions. And instead of taking a proactive approach, which is I think what you were trying to describe, they have taken, you said they are now trying to dampen down the rate of transmission. So they are taking a reactive approach to the virus. It almost sounds like a political decision, which is is proving to be quite catastrophic on a daily basis.
Western governments have been complacent. The WHO and China have been warning the West about this since December and January. In February, the WHO, the World Health Organization, put out its mission report, one of the best reports I've ever read, and it's on the web, WHO China Mission Report, in which they said what countries need to do. And they said Western governments are not prepared to listen because of their mindset. And they have urged us to follow China's suit. We do not need to make it up as we go along. We have the classic public health tools and the classic public health expertise. It's just that we've decimated these resources over 2 decades. We need to put it back, and we need to take the measures that the WHO is advocating. And really, the contact tracing, the medical observation, clinical observation, and the isolation and quarantine are critical, as is the dampening down the restrictions on travel and movement. So, for example, from London to the rest of the country, that needs to be stopped, from the West Midlands to the rest of the country, apart from, of course, deliveries and essentials. But there need to be cordon sanitaires put in. And they could be put into areas of Scotland where there's almost no virus, or there's no virus at all. And then those communities could begin to examine whether there's sufficient risk for the local community, and then it can be lifted so schools could go back to operating and children could get their education.
Joyce, another organisation that's come in for some criticism over their dealings with it through this whole crisis, and especially this week when they announced that there were going to be no more breakfast bulletins in Scotland, is the BBC. What have you made of media coverage, particularly from the BBC, of the crisis so far?
Well, I made the mistake of tweeting about this, and I forgot that the very words BBC and Scotland together in a tweet are enough to unleash the furies of hell. For a lot of people in the sort of yes movement, it's become a symbol of what they see as unfair treatment. But that actually, in this instance, wasn't what I was on about. I mean, for a long time, I did eventually become a yes voter in 2014, but for a long time before that, I was a kind of UK reformer, and one of the things that when we were campaigning for devolution and all that, and one of the things that was key really to that was to have the BBC as the national broadcaster actually recognising all the different regions, investing in them properly, and paying due attention to them. And what I think has happened in this crisis with the BBC, it's not so much anything to do with the work that the BBC journalists in Scotland are doing, not at all. I mean, there are some very fine people in the BBC in Scotland. It's to do with the zero profile that issues to do with Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland tend to get in the main sort of bulletins that most people watch. So you'll be watching something, they'll be talking about the government, and they mean the UK government. They'll go on and on about kind of the domestic politics of Downing Street, and then they will give you a lot of coronavirus information and interviews and vox pops and interviews with frontline NHS staff, which are all about NHS England. And actually, as far as people in Scotland are concerned, some of the information that's contained in that about what the NHS is doing or trying to do is just not accurate. It doesn't tell you how the NHS in Scotland is trying to deal with this. And they don't flag up. They never say, if you're in Scotland, some of these details will be different. Go to our BBC Scotland service for more information. You know, they never do that.
I think, Kenny, I certainly know how disappointed a huge number of people are that we, for understandable reasons, have not been able to gather in Arbroath this weekend. There were a range of events planned, cultural, celebrating democracy, and demonstrating demands for self-determination and independence for Scotland. Two items which are certainly important threads in the declaration itself. And I think that that continuity between such a striking and important document 700 years ago and the wishes and aspirations of the people of Scotland today, I think that similarity and that connection is very important, and that was part of why we were keen to celebrate. I think it's clear that people's appreciation and understanding of the Declaration of Arbroath has increased in recent years. I think for a very long time it was a document that quite literally was kept in a cupboard and didn't figure widely. However, the appreciation of its importance and both in terms of the Scottish state and the Scottish people, but also in terms of the development of political thought and political theory in Europe and then the world is very important. And so we were also very mindful that in the past the anniversaries of the signing of the Declaration have been rather more subdued and rather more irrelevant events in the past. I think I'm reminded of the story of Wendy Wood standing up in one of these previous events in Arbroath Abbey and accusing those who were leading the commemoration of being hypocrites. And so I think it was very important for the independence movement and for the people of Scotland to be able to participate and celebrate such an important document. And certainly we were expecting it to be a very large event and to get attention across the UK and worldwide. So we lost that opportunity this year. We will certainly are planning to organise a march in Arbroath next year because this event deserves to be marked. And I think also it shows that what actually happened yesterday with a succession of online events, a digital rally in the afternoon, Leslie Ruddock's film of the Declaration of Arbroath being published in the morning, and then the 700 Live Cllr hosted by Broadcasting Scotland last night. I think that shows the determination of the Scottish people to mark the event, and it shows again that the independence movement it operates in the real world, so it reflects real world events, but it is not going to be suppressed. The determination of the people and of the independence movement to be heard and to succeed was not bowed by the results of the last referendum, and it is not being bowed by the current crisis that we are enduring at the moment.
At Easter, we're often thinking about new life, new beginnings. It's the spring anyway, so that always kind of puts those thoughts in mind. What are your hopes for after the coronavirus? Richard talked about something like UBI, which has kind of shot up the agenda in several countries just in the last few weeks. What else do you think you might like to see as a
I was just nodding away as Richard was saying UBI, and Thinking back to work I was doing 15 years ago, looking at some early ideas around this and what it might look like, and taking part in schemes to live on a universal basic income myself for a while, and finding that really interesting and continuing to put that into practice. So one of my hopes would be that things that people are learning about thriftiness and about a greater simplicity in their lives, and a greater neighbourliness and community connectedness and care for one another, that these would continue, that we don't go back to normal, because normal was pretty horrible for many, many, many people. And even those who were really well off, there were elements of their lives which were really quite catastrophic. But I think for me, you mentioned Easter, and, for me, I'm a person who prays and who was raised within the Christian tradition, within the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I think for me, it's quite important that we remember that Easter was a horror show. Easter was a crucifixion. Easter was the use of a torture implement, mass torture and mass executions done by an occupying power to the Palestinian people 2,000 years ago on a jumped-up crime. This is the story we receive. And I think whether you believe it as fact or whether you live it as story, as an important narrative, it's one which has shaped the lives of many of those who are within at least three of the great religions of the book, in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And that within this understanding, hope is not fluffy bunnies. Hope is not spring flowers. Hope is hard. Hope after what is called the resurrection, and I don't rightly theologically know what resurrection is, but hope is not instant joy. Hope is found in these strange stories that we're given about somebody having companions as they are able to leave a city that's been under curfew and walk to visit friends for the first time, and is accompanied by somebody on a road, and then is able to sit at a table and break bread. Hope is somebody meeting someone on a beach who's cooking fish for them. Hope is someone who's meeting a woman in a garden and saying her name, and is then imploring her not to rush to touch him. And all of these come out of a story, which is the story of Passover being celebrated in Jerusalem. And Passover, of course, was the celebration of being spared from a plague. And that was a plague that passed over on one night in Egypt, as the story goes. Here we are in confinement, where we're hoping that for many of us, this plague will pass over us. But the learning that the Israelites did, and the learning that's come through those traditions, is very much a learning of Sabbath, of Jubilee, of the release of prisoners, of the forgiveness of debts. And this is what we're seeing society doing by decree at the moment. We're seeing some people being released from detention. We've seen some of the early release of people who've served their sentences. We've seen the bringing in of all of these extraordinary financial measures. We've actually discovered that there really is a magic money tree, that we really can put things in place when we need to. We've discovered who the people are who we need to honour in our society, from the health workers through to the cultural workers who are helping us make our lives worth living as we are living them under confinement for many of us. Though obviously not to forget that many are living in a great deal of danger within their own homes. So I think for me, at Easter, these are the things I'm thinking of. I'm thinking that Easter was a horror show, and I'm thinking that as a result of it, people began to practice different ways of living, and some of those they sustained forward. And that in sustaining those forward, in genuinely saying, who is my neighbour, and how do I show love and care for them, and make sure that they're okay? How do I love them as myself? That then brings hope.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Richard, I almost don't want to ask you to try and follow Alison there. But
I was just sitting here wondering how I would. I mean, everything that Alison has said, but just to draw out of that, I think we hopefully, if we're minded to be, we're reflective creatures by nature, and I think that out of this, we have been shown a lesson, and I hope we take it, about how fragile society sometimes can be, but also within that fragility, how strong some of the bonds are, our bonds to our family, our friends, our neighbours. We've seen how people have come together to look after each other at this time. We've seen what we value in society. We've perhaps learned that what we esteemed in the past in ways of life that we esteemed prior to the virus, perhaps those things weren't actually making us happy. Those things weren't things to strive and aspire to after all. So it gives us all an opportunity for personal reflection with this great pause that we're in at the moment about our lives, where they're going, how they impact on others, the legacy we leave. And as I say, rediscovering what it is that is genuinely important to us, our families, our friendships, those round about us, the society we live in, and what kind of society we want that to be.
We have seen the government being somewhat reluctant to publish figures about England, either that or just not being able to gather that data. But generally speaking, there's been a lot of criticism, as I say, especially in this Sunday Times article that's going fairly wild on social media this morning. What's your feeling about how the government has responded? I mean, this article says the headline is 38 days when Britain sleepwalked into disaster. What's your feeling about how the British government has led on responding to this crisis?
I think just before commenting on that, just the issue with data on deaths. I mean, obviously we are now publishing that weekly, and one of the issues with ONS data is they're only publishing every 2 weeks, so it is too far behind. And there's quite worrying sharing of documents on social media. Obviously, you've no way of verifying them, where really doctors seem to be being almost discouraged from putting COVID-19 as either a cause of death, a suspected or probable cause of death, or even a contributory cause of death. Whereas in Scotland, we are counting, if COVID-19 is mentioned, the deaths are being counted. Whereas this document that's being shared suggests, you can just put pneumonia. And I think it will also be important that we look at what are the numbers of people who are registered as having died of pneumonia or viral pneumonia, because the chances are they were also COVID related. And it's important that we have accurate data. With regard to the 38 days, I mean, I have to say that, having been in Westminster when we were having a coronavirus urgent statement or urgent question kind of almost weekly, there was a kind of atmosphere of complacency. There were references to Italy as if somehow they had a second-class healthcare service, whereas actually Lombardy is a very wealthy region, and they have twice the critical care bed ratio that the UK has. When I raised things like not shaking hands or working from home, I was kind of dismissed. And even on the 11th of March, when it was declared a pandemic by the WHO, now they had already declared it long before that as an epidemic of global concern, but it was not yet in their definition of pandemic. But on that night, on the 11th of March, we had an emergency statement at 7 o'clock, at which absolutely nothing changed. There was no increase in activity or anything else. The message was still wash your hands and use a hanky. Now, the following day, we had, we are changing from the containment phase to delay. And there then seemed to be this stepping back from testing and tracing. But there wasn't any call for lockdown or changing the public's activities. If you remember, the First Minister came out and said there shouldn't be any large gatherings and took an absolute pasting for it. She was attacked right across the media for, this is nonsense. And then, we had a gradual ramping up. But the lockdown, as it's called, didn't come until the 23rd of March. And the lockdown in Scotland is more strict in that the FM has been very clear that non-essential construction or businesses or manufacturing should not be open. Whereas we keep hearing this narrative in Westminster of the economy has to keep going. And the worry is that still both in that and in talk about when you might lift the lockdown advice, is still more about the economy. And I have to say, I would agree with the First Minister. You can work to rebuild your economy, difficult as that is. You can't bring people back to life.
Obviously, as you say, Wales doesn't have quite the same media apparatus that Scotland has. So what's been your feeling about the way the UK-wide or the London-centric media has responded to this? There's been, we've seen headlines like Boris's health is the health of the nation and things like that. What do you make of the way that the media in general has responded?
Well, I think there's going to be a big distinction between different types of newspapers and different certainly with the print media. If you compare the thing which most concerns me is the way in which the identities of the people who've passed away with this virus are not being given the same respect, almost as if when we've seen terrorist atrocities, that it's very normal for the newspapers the following day to have the front page to be photographs of the people who've died. Every single day, there are hundreds of people dying. And we don't hear very much at all about who those people are. I think that to a certain extent, it's probably going to be a horrible inevitability that the media and public consciousness becomes, deadened is a very unfortunate phrase, but it becomes more numbed to the identities and to the individual tragedies as more and more people pass away. I think it is vitally important that we don't lose a sense of the tragedies, of the fact that these people who are dying, they're not just numbers, they are individual lives, and many of them may not have died if the UK government had acted more quickly. And I think that I'm frustrated at the moment with how there are sections of the media, not all sections of the media, but there are some sections of the media who seem to be trying to cause a stir and saying that we should come out of lockdown more quickly than we probably should. I'm by no means an expert in this, but the scientists who are experts seem to be saying, and also the health boards in my area are telling me that if we come out of lockdown now, they may well not be able to cope in their ICU. So I think that the media, even more so now than ever, has a responsibility to be sensible and to relay information in a way that isn't going to cause panic or really terribly unfortunate behaviour from members of the public. So, I mean, I think, obviously the press are going to want new stories, and it must be very frustrating at the moment that there is only really one story in town. But I think that there are some parts of the media at the moment that are reporting things in a way that I don't think are very helpful. And they could be dangerous. Yeah.
And Michael, here in Scotland, I mean, obviously, we don't want to lump all the media together. For example, the Sunday Times last week did that excellent report that I think really changed a lot of people's attitudes to what's been going on in the Westminster government. But then with this week, we also saw one newspaper in Scotland basically looking for a headline saying Nicola cancels Christmas. What's been your feeling about the way the media has responded to this?
I mean, Delyth is right to say there are different types of media and they have different levels of responsibility. We're going to have to reflect long and hard about how the media has been affected by this. Some of them will not survive too. I mean, there's real fear and worry, particularly in the local press, and some really worrying signs of things they're taking on. The West Highland Free Press, which has been one of the campaigning local newspapers of Scotland. I may have had my disagreements with them. I have had my disagreements with them, but I'm not happy to see them, for example, ceasing physical publication, from now until June and operating only online. I know in my own area where there are newspapers, I've been in touch with 3 of the major local newspapers in my very large area, Vergard and Butte, this very week, who've got severe problems. So we're going to have to see how they come out of it. We're also going to have to reflect upon 24-hour news cycles in a pandemic.
It is the first global event like this in which we've had 24-hour news cycles, and social media is a major player. There have been good and bad things in that. I tend not to take a very short-term view of the media. Journalists come and go, newspapers come and go, programs come and go. If you look, you talked about the health of Boris is the health of the nation. I do not read the Telegraph because I do not believe that the Telegraph represents your point of view I'm particularly interested in or want to know about. So the Telegraph can publish what it wishes. It's a free world. But people may not buy it because they may say, hang on a minute, that's complete nonsense. So I'm relaxed about it to that extent. I think there are lots of questions about how the media operates in Scotland that need analysis and discussion, and maybe we've been too willing not to have that discussion, and we probably need to have it at some stage. And it will be about ensuring that there is a healthy free press in Scotland that can operate as it wishes to do, including say whatever it wants and however critically it wants to be, and even publish ludicrous headlines like Nicola cancels Christmas. Well, I've seen the ludicrous headlines in the press before. I'll see them again no doubt.
We are just coming to the end of the time that we have with you, so I do want to thank both of you very much. Michael, we've had you on a few times, and you're always welcome. Delyth, I hope we can have you back again sometime soon. But thank you very much to both of you, and do take care of yourselves and those around you. And we'll talk to you again soon.
In a week in which you've been the subject of the news yourselves, start your elbowing and keep going. The more questions you get to ask at press conferences, the happier we'll all be.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. We're trying our best. But moving on, though, to one of the big stories of the week. And Kevin, I'd like to come to you first on this because as a political communications professional, how would you have coped with the crisis caused by the First Minister saying it might be an idea to cover your mouth and people in power down south not saying the same thing? It seems to have caused great confusion, great anger amongst our media class, and even our former Secretary of State, David Mundell, said he was confused because he couldn't cope with different advice on either side of the border. What do you make of this kerfuffle that arose earlier this week?
Not very much. I mean, I think when you listen to the advice, and I think it's excellent that there are daily press conferences, and First Minister's taking them, I think, just about every day, other than perhaps Sundays. But everybody can tune in. It's fantastic that we've all got access to the information in a way that would have been unthinkable, actually, 20, 25 years ago. Imagine if we'd had the situation in the 1980s or even early 1990s where we wouldn't have been able to access the information directly from the decision makers. It would have been much more difficult. So I don't think there's a lot of excuse or reason for confusion. We can simply directly access what the decision makers and the leaders are saying within the area of the jurisdiction. And it's not, it doesn't necessarily even have to be Scotland, and the rest of the UK. As we go through this, there could be even much more localised decisions having to be made. I mean, I referred earlier to the situation in Inverclyde, and there are some calls from local politicians here for some particular measures that may need to be taken here. And if that's the case, we'll obviously listen to what's being said in respect of Inverclyde. Or there may be slightly different positions and different measures that need to be taken in more sparsely populated areas, compared to our urban areas. I don't think any of that is confusing. I don't think any of us need to be confused unless we want to be confused. It seems very clear to me that within the area where we are, whether that's Scotland, whether it's elsewhere in the UK, whether it's in a particular locality, we access directly, because we can, what we're being asked to do, and then we do that. That seems to me pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. And Kirstine, we are going to talk a wee bit later about some polling data around those levels of trust. What did you make of this story and the kind of general urge that some journalists have to chase a headline or a controversy rather than just talk about the news, what the facts are?
It's very interesting, the contrast and the bipartisan nature of our media compared to when you look at other countries that are having exactly the same issues. If you look at the way in which different regions of Italy have come into and out of lockdown at different rates, and there's been different advice. Certainly the north and Lombardy is giving very different advice to Sicily. And this doesn't seem to cause much problem within the media, because they understand that different areas are affected in different ways, and there might be different public health situations and different advice to take. But we have a unique situation within the UK in that we have a very bipartisan Scottish media and a very bipartisan UK media, so that any opportunity to make political capital out of what I absolutely agree with Kevin is a complete non-story. I mean, sorry, but I don't know how easily confused David Mundell is. But the idea that you do wear masks, and Nicola Sturgeon thinks it would be a good idea to wear masks, and actually the UK Westminster government have sort of made some indication that they think it might be sensible as well. The actual public health information on masks is that it doesn't, if you wear it, it doesn't necessarily protect you from, but it's very good at protecting other people if you are a carrier. And we know from a lot of the public health data, particularly from South Korea, that certain age groups, particularly the under 30s, are carriers of this completely asymptomatically. About 90% of the 20s and unders were found to be positive for coronavirus and showing no symptoms whatsoever.
This week, of course, saw the 75th anniversary of VE Day. And then, of course, yesterday was Europe Day. Now, those two things are linked. The creation of the European Union, the coal and steel community, as it was at first, was a way to intertwine the economies of Germany and France to the extent that they couldn't go to war again. And we do have a wee video clip of Philippa Whitford speaking in Parliament. This was a wee while ago, but I think it speaks very highly of Philippa. She talks about her husband Hans, who of course is German, and his experience. So we'll just show that clip, and then we'll talk a wee bit more about it.
And giving way. Most people in this chamber know that my husband is German. What not all of them will know is that his mother was Polish, and his parents were not allowed to marry. The child they had together was taken from them. His mother was a forced labourer and his father was lifted by the Gestapo. And long before we ended up in this mess, he used to celebrate that in one generation he could live and work where he wanted and marry who he loved. And in one more generation, we're taking it away. It's shameful.
Now, we had a discussion about VE Day on Friday with Murray Pittock and with Ellen Hofer. We talked quite a bit about the kind of mentality about VE Day. Now, we saw on Friday there people apparently completely ignoring lockdown rules to go and have street parties. We saw people dancing the conga, a socially distanced conga. Alison, coming to you first, what did you make of the way that we celebrated VE Day rather than commemorated it?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it should be a commemoration, not a celebration. And I was very struck by some of the tweets of people saying, well, the war was still going on, there was still people losing their lives, there was still a lot of heartbreak in VE Day, and it's not necessarily something to celebrate. And I was reflecting on my own family's experience. Lots of people were posting up pictures of their grandfathers and so on, and it was actually only my gran that served in the Second World War. She was in the Wrens, and she'd said something like when VE Day was announced, they had a wee sherry, and that was it really. There was not the kind of great sense of celebration that people were seeming to apportion to it now. And when you look at Europe Day in contrast to that and what has been achieved through winning the peace, it's not about winning the war, it's about winning the peace and bringing those countries together in such a way that that war is unimaginable. That's really the legacy that you want to look at it from. That you don't want to look at bunting and street parties. You want to look at international cooperation and friendship, because that's what came from that, and that's the thing that we really should value from that wartime experience.
Yesterday, several thousand citizens in Sarajevo gathered to protest against a mass that was being held for people who were killed in Bleiburg in 1945. These were Ustašas, Croatian nationalists, pro-Nazis, who had gone to Bleiburg in Austria hoping to escape the communist forces that were kind of overtaking Yugoslavia at that point. The British Army turned them back, and they were murdered. They were killed by the people who were not very happy with the things that they had done during the war. And they've held this mass every year since then. The Croatian nationalists perceive it as a symbol of the suffering that they had under communism. But of course, anti-fascist protesters see it as a pro-Nazi occasion and have protested against it. So, Simon, just very quickly, do you have any thoughts on this event and how we manage those kinds of tensions that still exist?
This has been springing up in Europe. I mean, a lot of Europe, like, we've been quite lucky in these islands. Well, Ireland hasn't been, but we didn't suffer. And I've seen this happening in Italy. It's happening in Spain with the Spanish Civil War, because people agreed to just forget about it and move on after the Second World War. And now, after the Spanish Civil War, and now people are beginning to go back and realize that you just can't erase the past. In fact, this is a messy, dirty story. The Croatians bonded basically with the Germans. It was identified Catholic Europe versus Muslim, Muslim Serbs, Muslim Kosovans, etc., and it's got there's been you could say that the history and tensions are 500-600 years old between religious and ethnic groups in that part of the world. And the fact of the matter is the Croats sided with the Nazi regime, and they did create, and I can well understand anti-fascists reacting to this. And, unfortunately, it's something that we are worried about is you're seeing pro-fascists or groups springing up. We've seen it in Hungary, touch of it in Slovenia, all across Europe, and it's something that you've got to be very alert to. And, I can understand why it's so sensitive to people in the Balkans, and people, anti-fascists, feel so strongly about that.
Absolutely, yeah. And Jim, again, same question really. Do you have anything to say about this incident?
The thing that surprised me is I've just learned that it was a mass that was held by the Catholic Church. I think that was part of the celebration, which I found that quite strange. But Simon's right. There is definitely little pockets of this right-wing fascism popping up all over Europe, and it is absolutely something that we would need to be alert to, because it was. I think Europe kind of allowed itself to sleepwalk into the last situation where the right-wing fascism became the deadly force that it became. Yeah. So we need to be aware of it.
We start with one of the biggest stories of the weekend, certainly, in fact, one of the biggest stories of the entire coronavirus outbreak so far. And this is Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, one of his most trusted lieutenants, a chap who ran the Vote Leave campaign. He was found to have travelled to Durham, to his family's home, 260-mile trip with his wife and his young son, because he felt that the parents, his parents, needed to be able to look after his child if he got ill, which he apparently did. Now, this has caused quite a ruckus. Obviously, a lot of people very upset about this, but the government seems to be completely behind him, 100%. And Tommy, I'll come to you first on this. The reaction of the government has been to say that actually what he did was perfectly within the rules, and that actually it was the right thing to do, because anybody would want to do their utmost to look after their child. What do you make of the way that the the government has responded to this?
Well, I mean, I think it's a fairly typical response from the contemporary right-wing playbook, if you want. I mean, Steve Bannon would be very proud of what their response. It's simply a matter of, never apologise, never explain. And that's, they hope that they can just try and, face it out, and that eventually it will go away. I think the problem for them is that this one really isn't going to go away. There's no question but that Dominic Cummings should have gone already, and I'm pretty confident that he will go at some stage during the week ahead. They're lucky they got a bit of a breather in that Parliament is in recess this week, so it won't be possible to exert the same sort of pressure that we might have been able to do had Parliament actually been meeting. But it's only a matter of time. He's got to go, and I'm not at all impressed by this suggestion that he was only trying to be a good father and do what any father would do. I mean, there are millions, literally millions of people who are having their freedom curtailed at the moment in order to try and deliver on public health and to stop the spread of this contagion. We all know people who have been unable to visit sick relatives, who have been unable to attend funerals of loved ones, who have been, couples who have been unable to see each other because they weren't living in the same household at the start of the lockdown. Everyone has had to put up with a lot over the last few months, and it is simply unacceptable for the government to say that the public have to put up with that, but their chief advisor does not. Somehow he is exempt. It's quite shocking, and if they don't get rid of him very quickly, then it will spread. This will spread like a contagion too, a political contagion across the government, and it won't just be Cummings' resignation that we'll be seeking in the days ahead.
Well, we've seen the number 10 obviously put out a statement with full-throated support for him. Rishi Sunak tweeted in support, Michael Gove, Dominic Raab, I think, Matt Hancock. What is it about Dominic Cummings that he's able to exert so much power, it seems, when he is just a political advisor, really?
Well, I don't know what he's got on them. I mean, it's almost as if he's got some leverage that the press and the public aren't able to see. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, I suspect that they're just panicking now, and that they feel that being under so much pressure anyway, and with the government clearly quite strained at having to deal with the pandemic, that it would just be unacceptable for them to lose the kingpin of the political coordination in number 10 at this point. They're already fraying at the edges. If you take this guy out of the picture, then maybe the whole deck of cards might begin to fall. I expect some of them are extremely worried about that. But Rishi Sunak, Raab, and others are doing themselves no favours. I mean, they tarnish their own reputation going forward. And of course, I mean, the big problem about all of this is that it confuses the message. It means that there will be plenty of people now in the general public who will look at what's happening and say, oh well, if it's not that important, if it's only if it's not actually the law, it's only guidance, then it's fine if I break it because I've got an exceptional family situation. And suddenly, when tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people start doing that, then suddenly you have a very serious health problem, which is really caused by the government's inaction in dealing with the misbehaviour of one of their senior officials.
Mm-hmm. And Linda, this question of how the waters get muddied, the government had already come under a lot of criticism recently for their change from stay home to stay alert. A lot of people obviously said, well, that doesn't really mean anything. It's not a clear public health message. And one of the important things about public health messaging is that it is clear and simple and easy for everyone to understand. What do you think this will do to people's understanding of those public health messages?
Well, I think it's very damaging. So what we know from research about how people respond to government messaging is that trust is a key component. So people expect to be able to trust their senior officials, particularly politicians, but also people who are advising government. And of course, we've seen other high-profile cases, haven't we, including in Scotland, where the rules have been broken. So this undermines trust, fundamentally. That's the first thing. The second thing is it creates division. So what you see is somebody, in this case, who's very affluent and privileged, who's in a powerful position, and it looks like he's made decisions that the rest of society are not supposed to be taking. And that creates division and exacerbates inequalities. So that causes problems. The other element, as Tommy has already said, is about the power that particular individuals have. And again, sending the message that we're not all equal. So we've seen that scientists are disposable in this. Professor Neil Ferguson had to resign very quickly because of, again, a breach in the rules. So I think the problem is that we're in almost unprecedented times in the extent to which the population is expected to comply with government advice for their own protection. Really severe action. So if the government doesn't follow its own advice, including those close to elected officials, then absolutely, psychologically, the message to the public is that they shouldn't bother. And the other message is to the groups who already don't trust the state, don't trust the kind of apparatus of state, the organizations associated with government. And of course, there are many in society that have been disenfranchised and don't trust officials or institutions for sometimes good reasons. Those will be the groups that in particular will say, well, sod it. The risk is overrated, isn't it? I guess that's the final thing from a research perspective, is that there is a group in the population and in all countries that just think that governments are exaggerating about the risk of the virus. And to see somebody not following the rules who's prominent, I think will also support that. So for Scotland, obviously where we are, the government's been much more consistent and clear in its communication, even though we've had some unfortunate cases here as well. And I think what we need to do in Scotland is try and not get dragged into what I think is a UK level debate, and try and encourage the Scottish population to still stick with it for very good public health and scientific reasons.
The racial problems in America have not really changed, and are really being brought to the forefront now by a president who is actively making the divisions worse. And so whilst not taking away from the tragedy of Mr. Floyd, I think it's important that we see this in a national context. And at the moment, with 40 million people unemployed because of COVID, with more than 100,000 deaths, there are such big differences in equality across the country that you can understand why people are feeling very, very angry. And I have to say, of all of the social media clips that I've seen, the one that struck me the most was the petite chief of police in Atlanta actually walking without a mask, without any protection, through the demonstrators, talking to them and trying to de-escalate the situation. And that was probably the most cheering part of all of this, that some people do recognise that there is privilege and disadvantage and that people are not getting a fair shot.
Kind of tie together several of the things we've talked about today. Brexit clearly has had some impact on the movement towards independence. The coronavirus crisis is adding to that as well. What's your feeling about where the movement stands at the moment?
Well, the movement is exactly as the word says. It's a movement. It doesn't stop. There's different ways in which it's engaged. I feel that it's great for us when we do come together. It's nice to get the recharge, as I say. It's nice to be around like-minded people, because it can be quite frustrating. But we need to not shy away from having conversations with individuals who voted no, are still undecided and voted no because they just didn't feel confident enough to vote for an independent Scotland. I think that sometimes it's difficult we have to actively listen to what they're saying, because in several layers and over different intersectional issues, we talk about deeds, not words. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a really important part with this, is that some people I spoke to after the result of the 2014 referendum said that they were a bit sad that we didn't become independent, but they didn't feel that it could quite happen yet. They wanted to see Scotland performing well on a national level, to see them sort of build a bit more, they just felt they needed something a bit more tangible, something that they could hold on to. I think that Brexit and this pandemic with COVID-19 has allowed for those sort of views to be able to be flourished and physically see how Scotland can be a voice of strength on its own. Also, how we can manage our own by ourselves. We don't need to be assisted by the UK government. Know that we can effectively do things differently and have hopefully better outcomes. Some of that will be difficult to see. I might add that where there is a loss of life caused by a pandemic, those losses are devastating regardless of where you are in the UK. There's so many people that I've had to have conversations with during this time that are going through such horrendous loss, and we need to be sensitive to that. And that's not just about politics, it's about what is morally correct at this moment in time. So although the independence conversation will always take place, it will always be there. We are a movement. If people want to talk about it right now, then talk about it. Have those conversations with people, because it should never stop being part of the conversation. However, that heavy campaign mode is not right now. I think that the tone of it has been set very well by the First Minister, which is this is not about politics right now. This is not about an ulterior agenda. This is about making sure that the people of Scotland are absolutely at the front of making sure that our well-being as a whole is the priority at this moment in time.
This week, the EU Continuity Bill was published, which is in large part about kind of maintaining environmental standards, maintaining that level playing field with the EU, and being able to put EU law into Scots law. How has that kind of bill been progressing through Parliament, and what's been the kind of feeling in Parliament as you're doing this? Is there a concern that no deal is now a likely prospect?
Yes. Michael Russell made a statement to Parliament on Thursday, and I'm attending Parliament remotely at the moment, so it's interesting to catch up on what's been presented. But, Anthony makes a good point about how right now we are out of Europe, but we're in a transition process. And that's why folk are saying, oh, everything's fine, nothing's different, we're going to be fine. It's like, yeah, but the deal hasn't been done yet. And there's going to be real issues that we've heard, real complex issues, and the training of people to check produce as it comes in through the border is going to cost more than the actual membership for the EU in the first place. So the new bill that's going forward is to make sure that we keep pace with any EU changes, any changes in regulations, so that Scotland can meet environmental standards, environmental protection, so that we get ready, so for when we become independent, that when we can choose to join the EU again, that we will already be meeting the EU laws, especially with respect to the environment, so that it's easier for us to rejoin if that's when we put it to the people, if that's what they choose. So I am keen to make sure that we continue with the way that we move forward, to make sure that we keep pace with EU law, so that Scotland has, I guess, an easier approach to joining the bloc in the future.
The longer that Scotland is outside of the European Union, and the more distant the relationship between Scotland as part of the UK and the European Union, the more difficult it will be, of course. So distance is a factor, and time is a factor. But, joining the European Union is a process. You're right, as I wrote about in Scotland's EU blueprint and elsewhere, it would take a couple of years. The blueprint goes into much more detail about all of that. But so it's not as if, so for instance, there's been some discussion that we need to have an independence referendum before and have it take place before the transition ends. so we could sort of still be in the EU during the transition period, as it were. And that it's important to be as close to the EU as possible, but that really doesn't make as much of a difference. If it takes 4 years or 5 years to join the European Union, if you spend 6 months in the transition, for instance, and 4.5 years outside the EU, that really doesn't matter as much. What matters more is the extent to which Scotland, through the Scottish Parliament, through this new EU continuity bill, is able to maintain its pace with EU laws and policies for a multitude of reasons. One is to make it easier to rejoin the EU under independence, and the other is of course because it's a policies that we believe in terms of having high environmental standards, in terms of caring about workers' rights and so on, which is an important aspect of what the European Union is there to do. But I think, as Mike Russell has mentioned, it's to align where practical, because there will be some aspects where Scotland may well want to follow EU policies, but by the nature of devolution or by still being part of the UK, it just won't work. And in those areas, obviously, it won't be possible to keep pace, and that additional work will have to be done in terms of trying to rejoin the EU.
But thank you very much to Effie and to Sam for joining us. It's always a pleasure speaking to both of them. And thank you at home as well, obviously, for watching us. We make these shows for you, so thank you for tuning in and making it worth our while. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, this is always the hardest part of the show for me, but we do have to ask. If you're able to support us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month, first of all, helps us keep the lights on here, helps us keep producing the shows, but then the more subscribers we get, the more we can do. Imagine if everybody who paid a licence fee in Scotland instead paid that money towards Broadcasting Scotland, the kind of things that we could do here.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.